First, though, we all know there's a shortage of affordable housing in the south of England. We also all know there's a crisis in care provision for an increasingly elderly population, partly because the wages for carers don't match up to the cost of housing. But suppose you could find a way to make that vicious circle into a virtuous one. Our Oxfordshire reporter Bethan Nimmo has been looking at one scheme which is trying to do just that.
Dog walks, gardening, internet advice. In this household, they all count as rent. Andy needed a room and Rosemary had a spare one going.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, Rosemary. How are you?
I'm all right. So I'm going out to join a friend this afternoon, yes.
Oh, lovely.
It was at a time when Rosemary needed some extra support that Andy came into her life.
So I got to know about Homeshare through my second daughter. My husband was very ill at that point, and we decided it would be very good to have somebody like you in the house. And then he died, sadly, and you stayed on, which has been great for me because I didn't like being in the house on my own, and also you've been a huge help to me all these months that you've been here.
In exchange for around 10 hours a week of help, Andy gets accommodation. He's starting a career as an occupational therapist in the NHS and says he'd be paying £600 a month for a room in Oxford if he hadn't joined Homeshare.
Even as a working professional now, it's hard to make ends meet when most of your income is going out on rent in those amounts. It would have been another shared house, possibly another 9 people. And you can't really quarrel about living standards, so it would have been £600 a month for something probably quite ugly and very, very temporary. Very kind of.
So where is the gig?
Meanwhile, Rosemary gets the reassurance of having someone else around.
She's been so nice and kind and sympathetic. It's been really good. I think it's wonderful for people who are alone or in a position like I have been to know that there is a scheme like this where you can have somebody, you know, who will come and be either a companion or in the house at least.
The charity Age UK Oxfordshire runs Homeshare. They charge £100 a month to householders and £200 to sharers. Marion links up the two.
Sometimes people are looking for practical help, sometimes they're looking for companionship, others might be looking for reassurance of somebody being in the house at night. So they're sort of key things that we use to match people. And then, of course, there are sort of characteristics and interests, and you know that's crucial as well, especially if people are looking for companionship.
Oxford has a serious problem when it comes to house prices and rental costs. It's often cited as the least affordable city in the UK. That's affecting people of all ages.
We have real difficulties recruiting care staff in Oxfordshire, largely because of the cost of living. So Homeshare is not an alternative to care, but it can prevent people from needing care quite so quickly.
So this seems like it's got the potential to solve some pretty big problems. Should councils and government be putting in some money?
I think the government and local authorities and the NHS have been slower to catch on to the fact that this is a really good thing than they might have been. For all sorts of reasons, people have safeguarding worries about it, which obviously the scheme deals with. I think that there is real room for the government to push this scheme more and for some funding to be put into it.
No, that's the summary we sent.
For Rosemary and Andy, it's certainly become more about friendship than finances.
It was a natural move for me, really, because I do enjoy the companionship and the feeling of sharing in a home rather than a house.
Yes, I know you're there in case there is something.
Well, that's very kind.
So Andy and Rosemary made that work, but it's you've got to get exactly the right individuals, haven't you? And I can see that's why matching people up is actually quite a tricky job to do. And does it actually get to the fundamentals of the problem, which is Andy can't afford to live there, and Rosemary needs help with care, and it's not being provided? Stephen Morgan.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a really interesting project and something that I'm keen to learn more about. Social isolation is a big issue in our society, and there's lots of really good activity going on across the voluntary sector. And as we've just heard, the government could do more here, and I really welcome the publishing of a new strategy to tackle social isolation, because it's something that can affect anyone in life.
But
and I think the voluntary sector has a key role to play.
Yeah, so there's two representatives of two different generations with completely different needs. Who is it who needs to match them together? Is it a charity, as there, or is it actually legislation? Is it, you know, the state that should be doing this?
Well, I don't really care about who does it. It's about the outcome that's achieved. And I think actually that's someone that's looking for somewhere to live that's affordable and someone that's socially isolated. And bringing those two together, I think, is a real success story. Because sadly, we do have a housing crisis in our country, and we also have some real challenges around mental health services and support for people that are isolated.
OK, fair enough. A scheme that's working well doesn't tackle the underlying cause, though, does it, Louise?
I think it's a really imaginative scheme, and there have been other schemes like this before. The secret is in the matching. But, you know, at the moment, and it was highlighted that it's the same problem here, finding carers to help in our care homes and everywhere. Housing is a big issue in the southeast with the high house prices. So this is one way, but it's such a good win, because if you're elderly or frightened of falling, vulnerable, and, you know, mixing the generations, there's a huge amount that both people can gain. So, as you said...
But at the moment, generations are going in such different directions.
But that's the whole reason, whole reason why you should be doing it. In my division, I've got a school that once a week has people from an old people's home in with youngsters, and it is the most heartwarming.
Have you been watching that Channel 4 series?
I have, because why don't you
learn? Where they bring the goats and chickens and goodness knows what into the old people's home as well as the children.
These youngsters will play and talk, and there's a real relationship. And, you know, other countries have revered their elderly and have a family thing. We're recreating it in a different way. But there's a need somewhere, and I think this is one way of filling it.